Good evening, everybody. Let's start with our motivation. And this life hasn't ended yet, so we've had some more time to purify, to create merit, to learn the Dharma and put it into practice. So let's feel happy about that opportunity and have a strong wish to continue with that, because we know we have precious circumstances that won't last forever. And let's remember our ultimate long-term motivation for engaging with the teachings is not simply our own well-being in this life or future lives, not simply our own liberation, but really experiencing in our hearts the kindness of others, wanting to contribute to their well-being, especially through showing them the path to full enlightenment. And to do that, we have to become fully enlightened, to become a Buddha ourselves. And so we generate that long-term motivation for full enlightenment, for the benefit of all beings. So no matter how long it takes or what we have to go through, that's something meaningful and precious in our life, and we're going to go in that direction. And what we're doing tonight is taking one step there. Okay. So yesterday in our Vinaya class, I gave you a little quiz, and many people thanked me afterwards and said that it was very helpful for evaluating, what they've learned and what they haven't, what they've remembered and understood and what they haven't. And so I thought it would be nice for this class also to do a little quiz. And so I thought up some questions. I'll just read the questions off now, and then you can work on them between now and next Thursday. And then next Thursday we'll go over them together. Okay, so for the people on the web, the sheet has been posted on the website, so you should be able to download it. For those of you here, it'll get printed out. But it's good to listen and, maybe try and write them yourselves. Everybody's so lazy nowadays, Photocopy it for me. I remember in the old days in Bodhgaya, when we were, Lama Zopa was giving a whole series of initiations, and so we had all these mantras to recite. There's no photocopy machine, so somebody would write them out, post them on the board, and then every day you would stand there for however long it took to copy them out. Yeah. Oh, you look in disbelief. How could anybody do that? Nobody made outlines for text for us. We had to listen and write down the points ourselves and then work up the outline ourselves at home so we understood where we were going. The good old days. Okay, so the first quiz for the 4 establishments of mindfulness is going to cover just the introduction plus mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of feelings. Okay? So your questions are: 1, why are the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena selected as objects to establish mindfulness on? Why those objects? And how do those 4 establishments of mindfulness prevent childish sentient beings from grasping? And then how does preventing that grasping lead to liberation? Okay, so there's specific things. You can't just say grasping. There's specific things that those 4 prevent childish sentient beings from grasping at. Okay, then 2, how does the way in which the hearers and solitary realizers meditate on the 4 establishments of mindfulness differ from the way bodhisattvas meditate on them? Okay. It's a practice both of them do, but there's some differences. Okay, then the 3rd question: what is the correspondence between the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the 4 distortions, and the 4 noble truths? Okay, if you don't know what the 4 distortions and the 4 noble truths are, go back and listen to some of the talks, okay? And then the 4th question is: name 3 meditations that are included in mindfulness on the body. Okay, so mindfulness of the body isn't just one meditation, there's several different ones. Okay, question number 5. Describe the 3 meditations on a skeleton. In other words, describe the steps involved in these meditations, what you do in the first one, what you do in the second, what you do in the third one. Okay? The 6th question is: why are the meditations on the foulness of the body done? And what is a healthy relationship to have with our body? So why are we doing those meditations anyway? Then question 7, how do the 3 feelings relate to the 3 types of dukkha? Question 8, describe some of the ways to meditate on mindfulness of the feelings. Okay, so how do you do it? What are some of the meditations you do with mindfulness of the feelings? Okay, and question number 9, what are the 3 types of craving, and how do they relate to the 3 types of feeling? And make an example of each of the types of craving in your life. Then question 10, what is the purpose of meditating on mindfulness of feelings? In other words, why do it? Okay. Do you think those are easy or hard? Do you think you could answer them without going back to your notes? Some?
There'd be better answers if you notes.
There'd be better answers if you try. Yeah. So try doing it out, write it out without going back to your notes. Just see what you remember. Okay, write it out, and then go through it again and go back and look at your notes or watch the teachings again or read the text or whatever. Okay, so go through them twice, because if you go through them just without checking your notes, then that you'll really see kind of how much you've held, how much you remember. And then the second time you'll see if you take very good notes.
Good question.
Okay. So we've been talking about mindfulness of the mind. You know, the mind has the nature of the observer. And so, we went through all the different kinds of mind, primary mind, secondary mind, mental factors, and how the nature of the mind is actually pure, but it's obscured by the clouds of the afflictions. Okay, and then we talked a little bit about being aware of the moment-by-moment changes of the mind, and then contemplating the mind of the past, the mind of the present, the mind of the future. Okay, and where are they? Can you find them? You can't find the past because it's gone. The mind of the future you can't find because it hasn't yet arisen. The mind of the present isn't the same from one moment to the next. So really experiencing that in your meditation, seeing how each moment of mind is arising and disintegrating in the same instant. Yeah. So don't think of a moment of mind like it arises, then it abides permanently without changing for an instant, and then it ceases. That's the way we tend to think, don't we? It arises and it changes while it's arising, then it stays stable for a minute, and then it changes again. That's our conceptual mind, yeah? Yeah. Can a moment of mind stay stable? Yeah. That kind of model is saying it's both impermanent and permanent. Can something be both impermanent and permanent, both static and changing? No, it's got to be one or the other. Okay? But do you see how we just kind of automatically go into, kind of even in our life? Well, there's birth, and then there's life. Life is just this, unchanging thing. And then there's death, Whereas, actually, from the moment you're starting to be born, you're also in the process of dying. Okay? It's funny the way we think of things. Okay, and then we also talked a little bit last time about how being mindful of the subtle impermanence of the mind reduces the fear at the time of the death, because we see that even though a moment of mind does not exist for a second moment, there is a continuum. So we see that, and that continuum is going to continue. And then we also begin to see that the I is imputed or designated in dependence upon the mind. Okay, so as we realize those two things, then the fear of death goes away. Because in death, we're thinking, first of all, I'm going to cease to exist. Yeah. Well, when we see that the I is designated in dependence upon the mind, then we see that, hey, the I isn't so solid to start with, so, it's not going to cease. It's only a designated entity. And then also, if it exists in relationship to the mind, the mind is also not going to discontinue. It is going to have a continuum, even though it doesn't last for, each moment doesn't last for a second moment. Okay? And so in that way we see we're not going to go out of existence at the time of death. And so then that soothes the fear of death. That particular fear of death. Then, if we become aware that the I continues on after death, then we have, concerns about, well, where am I going to be born and what am I going to be? Okay. Yeah. Okay, but this fear of becoming completely non-existent, is a very primary one at the time of death, and that is what generates craving and clinging, the 8th and 9th links, which give rise to existence, which, leads to rebirth. Yeah. Existence is, in the 12 links, is the karma in the process of ripening that's going to throw the next rebirth. Okay, so that's one of the ways to be mindful of the mind. The second way is to look for the mind. Okay, so sit there in your meditation and see if you can find your mind. Okay, so you can start by asking yourself, does the mind have any color? Does it have any shape? Is it located in a specific place? Okay, so you might start with very grossly, we usually think our mind is inside of our head somewhere and identify the mind as the brain. And so is the mind located in the brain? Sit with that for a minute. My experience of mind, what I feel in my experience of mind, is that equal to the physical organ of the brain? In other words, if you put the brain out here on the table, would you say there's a mind there? And since a person is designated in relationship to the mind, would you look at the brain and say, there's Joe? I love Joe so much, you say, as you're looking at that brain on the table. Is that what we do? Yeah. So look for your mind somewhere, okay? Because, we're so physically oriented. And so often it feels like, well, my mind's inside my head, isn't it? Because the sense organs are there, so my mind is inside the head. Or sometimes it's kind of a little bit throughout the body, but look for it. What color is it? Can you draw a line around your mind? Okay. Can you tie it down with a pole? Okay. Can you see it under a microscope? When there's all these chemical reactions going on in the neurons in the brain. Okay, think of a brain with all these chemical reactions. When you look at those chemical reactions, do you see thinking? Is that what thinking is those chemical reactions? Think about it. If you touched the serotonin and the dopamine, would you experience the sensations that they bring to a person? Are those chemicals themselves the sensations that somebody experiences? Yeah, if you had serotonin in drops on your hand, or dopamine, so many drops of dopamine. Do you look at that? Oh, that feels so good. Yeah. Okay. So, as we do this, and really seriously in our meditation, try and find the mind, we get a very spacious quality, a very spacious quality. Kind of like a vacuity, because in fact the mind lacks color and shape and location. Okay, we can't say it's, in the frontal right cortex, or, the left, or in the cerebellum, or any of these places. Okay, we can't say it's here, we can't say it's there. But although we can't locate our mind exactly where it is, it still exists because things are appearing to it. That's the whole idea of the mind being whatever cognizes, experiences, feels, thinks, perceives, that whole cognitive aspect of us, the whole thing that makes the difference between a corpse and a living being. Okay? And so, we know the mind exists because things appear to it. It cognizes, it feels. Okay? So it's kind of, the mind in a way is like a mirror. Things get reflected in it. The object doesn't exist in the mind. The mind reflects it somehow. It's actually kind of miraculous when you think about it. Yeah? How does perception take place? Yeah? Not just the physical things and the nerve endings and the, going to the area in the brain and stuff like that. But how is it that something that is external, that is physical, is apprehended by something that is not physical? Yeah? And where is this subject that is apprehending, that is cognizing? Where is it? What is it? Okay, so that can be very, very interesting meditation to do. Yeah. So we think our primary mental consciousness is the real personal identity. It's easy to say, my visual consciousness, my auditory consciousness, that's not me. Because we're not always seeing, we're not always hearing. Those things, it happens sometimes and, yeah. But the mental consciousness, that's the one where we think, that's me. And especially because the mental consciousness is the one that thinks. So then we get into, my thoughts are me. Yeah. My opinions are me. My ideas are me. My personality is me. My habits are me. What in the world is a personality? Yeah. So, when you really begin to look and see how we think that the mental consciousness in particular is the real person, kind of like I am the whole collection of my thoughts. But sit there in your meditation, it's quite interesting, and say, what is a thought? Okay? Is a thought the mental consciousness to which some kind of image is appearing? Or is a thought the image that's appearing to the mental consciousness? So what's the thought? Is it the object or is it the subject? Yeah. And sit there and watch your thought. Okay, I'm thinking, I have a thought. What's a thought? Yeah. I'm thinking about the answers to those questions. Is the content the thought? Or is it the mind to which that content is appearing? That's the thought. Yeah. Because we tend to see those things as like completely, there's an object and there's a subject, and they're both inherently existent, and they exist without each other, but they just kind of happen to bump into each other. But can you have the subject to the consciousness, the mental consciousness to which content is appearing? Can you have that without having some content? And can you have the content of a thought without having the mental consciousness to which that content is appearing? Yeah. Okay, so we think our primary mental consciousness is the real personal identity. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we get very attached to our thoughts. Yeah, you noticed how attached we get to our thoughts. I think, that the way out of the economic mess is blah blah. And I think it, therefore it's right, therefore everybody should believe it. I'm very attached to my thoughts. even though I might change them the next day. Yeah? I'm very attached. I know how to keep the kitchen clean, so we put the cups upside down in the cupboard. These right side up people, so unsanitary. But the right side up people say, oh, the upside down people, their cups aren't clean. We're very attached to our ideas. Yeah? You use this towel to dry your hands and this towel to dry the dishes. Don't ask me why. I've asked, and some people say, well, your hands are dirtier, and you don't want the germs from your hands then going on the dishes. But your hands were just in the water that washed the dishes. Yeah, and you'll pick up some of the food and eat it with your hands, and then say, oh, my hands are dirty because the food is on them. But other times you say, the food is dirty because your hands were on it. Have you ever realized that? What we consider clean and dirty? You know? If you have a plate before you and somebody comes and puts their hands in it, you go, ooh, my food's dirty. Okay? But if you go and put your hand in somebody else's food, ooh, my hand's dirty. You ever thought about that? You know? We're not sure what's clean and what's dirty, and what makes what clean and what makes what dirty. Yeah? Okay. This shows us how relative things are. Okay. So we're looking for the mind. It's formless. It's not material. Examine where it is. If it exists in the body as a whole, does your mind exist? Does your whole mind exist in your whole body, or does your whole mind exist in one part of your body, or does a part of your mind exist in each part of your body? Okay. That's an interesting thing. Think about that for a minute. You know, my whole mind and my whole body. Yeah. So then, what happens if you have a limb amputated? Did you know? Because your whole mind is in your whole body. So if you take off part of the body, do you lose your whole mind? Do you lose your whole body if you lose a limb? At what point of cutting parts off do you stop having a body? Okay. And then if you have part of your mind, you know, in one part of your mind in each part of your body, then what parts of your mind go to what parts of your body? Yeah. So, okay, my audio consciousness, it exists in there, and my visual consciousness exists in there. Oh, but maybe it also exists in the visual area in my brain. Maybe my visual consciousness exists in both places. Okay. But then what about my tactile consciousness? Does my tactile consciousness exist only where I have nerve endings? What about there's parts of my body without nerve endings? Yeah. Is there any consciousness there? Or is that part of my body dead because there's no nerve endings there? That's an interesting one, isn't it? There's no nerve endings, so there's no sensations, there's no sensory contact with anything. So is that part of the body dead or alive? Does it have mind or not have mind? Yeah. And then again, if you lose part of your body, do you lose part of your mind also? Yeah. I thought it was having kids that made you lose your mind. I saw that. Somebody had one of those stickers somewhere in their house, you know. Can't remember what the first part of it was, but, you know, at what point are we losing our mind? And do you remember when we were doing the exercise? You did the 32 or 36 parts of the body. So do you remember when we were doing it last year that the question came up especially about the last pentade or sextade, with the fluid ones? Are they really me? Is my blood me? Is my blood my body? Yeah. Is my lymph my body? What about my pee? Is my pee my body? Is it part of my body? Is it part of me? Or is it outside of me? And what about my blood? Is it me? Is it part of my body? But then if they take it out and it goes into somebody else, what is it? Yeah? So this is all very interesting exercise in seeing how when we label things, we confuse the label with the basis on which it's labeled. And we think that the designated object is the basis of designation. There's a very good exercise in that. Yeah? And seeing how things exist merely by designation, not in and of themselves. Yeah. And like we say with our body, I know I'm going off the track, but I love doing this kind of thing. We say this is my body. Well, at what point does the body stop being mine? And at what point does it start being mine? And considering that the genetics came from our mom and dad, and all the food came from the farmers, or maybe the food is the it came from other sentient beings' bodies because we ate meat, then how is it that I say this body is mine? What about this body is mine? And when did it start being mine? And when does it stop being mine? It's quite interesting, isn't it? To think about what is it that makes this body mine? Same thing with our mind. What is it that makes this mind mine? Yeah, I say this is mine. I know it's mine. It's not yours. But what does it mean to say something is mine? What does it mean? Is there any kind of sticker or label that identifies something as mine? How do I know it's mine? Okay, but that's getting off on confusing the designation with the basis. Let's come back to looking at the mind. Okay, so upon analysis, we start examining, where the mind exists in the body, and then we really look and say, does the mind, is it really the self? Does it seem to stand so strongly as it did before for being the self? Yeah, because upon analysis, we can't find some kind of, strongly existing, firm, solid mind. So if we can't find that kind of solid mind that we can point to, how can we say that is me? That is the self. Yeah, if we can't. Are you getting what I mean? When we don't examine, the mind seems, oh yeah, I know what the mind is, this is it. But when we start to examine, what is the mind becomes very, very blurry. So when it becomes blurry under analysis, then how is it that we're saying, this is me, this mind is me? Okay? So meditating like this weakens the misconception of the mind being the actual identity of the self, of the person. Okay? And when we discover this kind of essenceless nature of the mind, he can't pin it down, then that leads us to reflect that it is mistaken to cling to it, to hold to it as an inherently existent identity, as an inherently existent personal identity, as me, as I. Okay, so when we see that it's incorrect to hold to that as our personal identity, then that generates an aspiration in us to understand the lack of personal identity. Okay, and that leads us, to meditate, to understand the lack of personal identity, and that in turn leads us to true cessations, to the cessations of dukkha and the origins of dukkha, the third noble truth. Okay? And so it's in that way that mindfulness of the mind is correlated with the third noble truth. Okay? So as long as we conceive of the mind as being the self, then the idea of non-self, of selflessness, is going to be very scary. And we won't want to meditate on it because it's scary, it's unpleasant. Just the way as long as we think that the mind is the self, then death becomes very scary. Okay? And so in the same way, meditating on emptiness will be very scary as long as we think of the mind as being the self. Okay, because then it seems like if we see see emptiness, that we're destroying ourselves. We're destroying the mind, we're destroying ourselves. Okay, so having all those kind of conceptions, that creates an obstacle to even wanting to hear teachings about the lack of a personal identity or the lack of self. Okay? So it's very important for us to understand that realizing emptiness does not destroy the mind. Okay? Realizing emptiness does not destroy the mind. Especially realizing the emptiness of the person. Yeah, we're seeing that there's nothing that we can pinpoint as the person. But that doesn't destroy the conventional existence of the mind. Yeah? Doesn't even destroy the conventional existence of the person. Okay? So that's a second way to meditate on mindfulness of the mind. Looking for it, and see where that takes you. Then a third way is to ask ourselves, what is the mind? And so we're all very good at reciting the definition. It is clarity and awareness, or luminosity and knowing, however you want to translate it. The Tibetan is Seljing Rigpa. Okay, so we all know that definition, but that's not enough to understand what the mind is. Oh yeah, mind's clarity and awareness. Well, that's nice. What's that? Okay, so we need to understand the meaning. We need to be able to identify our own mind. Yeah, through our own experience, to identify our own mind and to know the nature of our own mind. Both here we're just talking the conventional nature, but of course also the ultimate nature of our mind. Okay, so scientists, when you ask them what's the nature of the mind, they're kind of stuck. They can tell you all about the brain, but the mind, they're really kind of stuck. Okay? So we experience our mind, but we don't have a precise understanding of exactly what it is. We know we're conscious beings, we experience consciousness, we cognize, we feel, but we don't really know what all this means and what's going on. Okay, so the mind is what knows, it's what is aware, it's what cognizes and experiences objects. Okay. Okay, it's formless, like we knew from the preceding meditation. It's clear light in the sense that the basic entity, the clear light nature of the mind means the basic entity of the mind being able to cognize objects. Has the ability to cognize objects. Now, where is that located? And what in the world has that ability to cognize objects? Yeah? And sometimes we start to feel, well, the mind maybe is a process, but actually it's a thing, it's a noun. There's the mind. It's the agent. It's not just the process. And yet it's not an inherently existent agent either. Okay, so the mind's like a mirror. It reflects everything, but we can't really identify it. It's like when, look in the mirror and can you identify what part of what you're seeing is the mirror? We say there's a mirror in the bathroom. When you go in and look at the mirror in the bathroom, do you see the mirror or do you see what's reflected in the mirror? Can we ever really see the mirror?
You can touch it.
You can touch it, but what about seeing it? Yeah? It's kind of weird, isn't it? The mirror reflects, but what actually is it? Yeah? Can you look at that thing and say, oh, this is the part that reflects. Here it is. It's weird. You can't do that. Okay, so so meditate on the mind like that. Okay, then a fourth way to meditate on mindfulness of the mind is normally we are engrossed with our sense consciousnesses, and even our mental consciousness is completely occupied with what the sense consciousnesses have perceived. Okay? Or if we're not focused on the external objects of the sense consciousnesses, we're focused on our own internal feelings. Okay? So always our mind is like buffeted around by the objects that it's cognizing. The mind is so reactive. One moment of mind cognizing an object it boomerangs and produces so many other moments of mind reacting to that one moment of mind that cognized the object. And you can see it so clearly when you're in retreat. In a session break, maybe you look outside and you see these white things falling from the sky, okay? And then your mind could go, oh, what a beautiful thing. And then it goes, I want to stay here and watch this. I don't want to go into session. And then how can I think of a reason to stay here and watch this and not go to session that everybody else in the group will accept? So, because I don't want to break I do want to break the discipline of the retreat, but I don't want other people to think I'm breaking the discipline of the retreat because I care about my reputation. Okay? And so do you see, you see just these white things falling out of those wood, and then the mind is off, isn't it? Yeah? Or maybe you see the white things in your break time. You go into the session, and then, then there's white Tara, and then you think, oh, but now I have to go shovel snow in the break time. Yeah? Oh, oh dear, I'd really want to spend time with White Tara sitting here, but I have to go shovel snow. I shoveled snow yesterday. I shoveled more snow than anybody else here. Why don't other people also shovel snow? I did that whole path and I made it really wide, just like they told us to, so that the nuns' robes don't brush along the side. Those picky nuns, They don't want to get snow on their shemna. I shoveled the snow so beautifully, and now it's snowing again, and I have to go out and shovel more. It's not fair. And our mind, again, it's tripping out, isn't it? Just because the I consciousness contacted these white things falling from the sky. Isn't it? We see, this is like such a good example of how we are controlled by our senses. How one small thing sets off, We can also see it in the community room, community meetings. Somebody says some words. Yeah, these sound vibrations come. They hit our ear, and then boy, we are off and running. They said that they're shoveling all the snow and nobody else is shoveling snow. They said that to me in particular. But I have a bad wrist. Don't they know that I can't shovel snow? These people, they're talking so much about compassion and they can't go and shovel more snow than me just because, and blaming me because I have a bad wrist. They never understand me anyway. This is my whole experience. Everybody expects so much out of me. I can't fulfill their expectations. This is so frustrating. Right? We just see it. Just, some small sense stimulation, and then really how it bounces back and forth in our mind with, different thoughts, different cognitions, different this, that, going back and forth. And we see how our minds are so controlled by what the senses perceive. And that's why they say when you're a monastic, you guard your senses. This is the whole idea behind keeping your eyes lowered, okay, by not paying attention to everything that you hear, by not going around and smelling everything. Yeah, okay, we guard our senses. Yeah, we don't put ourselves in environments where there's a lot of things to see and hear and smell and taste and touch. Because the more things our senses contact, the more things the mental consciousness has to think about and react to. And, we're always at that level of consciousness, thinking and reacting to objects of the senses. Yeah? And all the psychological stuff that we're so hung up on, all my psychology and what happened to me when I was a kid, and all of it started out with just raw sense perception. Didn't it? Maybe sound, maybe some colors and shapes. But then we react to it in a certain way, we construct stories about it, we get involved about the whole thing. Yeah? What we call my personality, what we call, all my wounds. I'm damaged good, I'm wounded. Because childhood is a disease you have to recover from. It all started out by plain old raw sense data. That's all. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so we are completely overwhelmed by all the sense data, all our thoughts and reactions to it, that we never see the actual nature of our mind. We can't see the clarity and awareness of the mind, because we're so operating at this very gross, reactive, completely diluted, hallucinating level, that just even the conventional nature of the mind we can't see. It's shocking when you think about it, isn't it? And we think, I'm so smart. I'm educated. I'm an intelligent person. Can't even see even the conventional, let alone the ultimate nature of our mind. Okay, and we're so busy thinking about what others said and what we feel, So if it's not the external reactions to the physical, the external objects, then we're cognizing our feelings, and we're reacting to our feelings. Oh, here I am, I'm angry again. Oh, I'm such a bad Buddhist because I always get angry, and then we're off and running on that. Okay? Okay, so to allow the actual conventional nature of the mind to arise, we have to stop remembering external events and stop remembering internal objects like our feelings. Okay? So we have to let go of all the thoughts that are planning or that are imagining for the future. All the thoughts that are interpreting and digesting the past. And then initially when we do that, we may feel like the mind is nothing, like it's just it's void and thoughtless. Okay? When we prolong this experience of not remembering the past and not thinking about the future, we might get an experience of voidness. I'm not talking about emptiness of inherent existence, but an experience of voidness or experience of nothingness, because we've created a gap in that we've very intentionally stopped the arising of mental elaborations and stop the arising of all the very gross thoughts and opinions and ideas. So an experience of stillness arises in the mind because our senses are not active. And when the senses aren't active, then the mind itself has maybe some chance of quieting down, not always. So then there's just an experience of the present, of like a void, an absence. And as we sustain that gap, we might get a glimpse of the mere, clear, and aware nature of the mind. Okay, and only at that time have we found, for the first time, the object of meditation for practicing mindfulness on the mind. Mm-hmm. This is as His Holiness teaches it, because he always tells this story about how he had that kind of experience. He was looking at a Buddha statue, and then, and the color was kind of a neutral color, and he then, stopped paying attention to the color and, stopped thinking about the past and the future, and had this sense of like a void or an absence, and then the mind got very still, and then really seeing the nature of the mind. Okay? And so we, at that point, then practice becoming familiar with that experience. And when we can do that, then we can also experience the momentary change of the mind. As the meditation and the samadhi deepens, you can actually see each moment of mind arise and cease. You can have a direct perception, direct mental perceiver. It's a direct yogic perceiver of the impermanence of the mind. So, any questions?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it's answerable. In looking, the meditation of looking for the moment, present moment, of course I was always needing an object because without some place to put my mind, it was all over the map. So when I had an image of the Buddha, when I used the mental image as my focal point, then I could at least sort of get a sense of time passing without getting lost in it. I wondered, A, if that was cheating. And B, since you can't find the mind anyway, looking for the mind and needing an object to, what do you do with that?
Yeah. Well, maybe start with that object. Where is the moment of mind visualizing the Buddha? Mm-hmm. Or what moment of mind is visualizing the Buddha? Mm-hmm. Okay? But there, the Buddha's just the image there, but your real object is that moment of mind. Okay? So start like that, and then from there maybe you can go into the clarity and awareness of the mind.
So lose the image.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When you have the experience of the mind settling down and getting still, and then you can feel that there's not so much going on.
Mm-hmm.
How do you? It's almost like then I get aware of that, and then that starts all the proliferation again.
Yeah.
So how do you keep that?
Yeah. Okay, so when you get some feeling of that lack of thoughts and the mind gets quiet and still, then the mind starts proliferating about that and now my mind is quiet and still. Yeah. So that's the thing, that's the difference between grasping at it and just focusing on it with concentration. Okay? What I find sometimes is when my mind gets still and quiet, then it's like, well, I better think about something. Because if I don't think about something, then I'm not doing something worthwhile. So let's dig up some emotion that I can go back and try and understand and rehash and sort out, because then I feel like I'm doing something in my meditation. Give me a problem to use thought training on, and then I'm doing something. But to just sit here and have a quiet mind, so either fall asleep or it's so boring. It's boring. I'm going to be bored. There's this incredible fear of boredom. So I better remember some problem and sort it out. Anybody else have that? You have that? You and I are quite similar in this kind of way. Yeah. Okay, yeah?
How is it that one can perceive the moment by moment arising of each moment of mind, but if the moments aren't abiding, what is the actual moment?
So what is the actual moment if they're not abiding? It's what is merely designated.
So
we have this idea, okay, that just like the threads, on the cloth, like there's one moment, and how the threads are right next to each other. There's one and then the next and next. We have this idea that moments of mind are like a film, with these definite little frames. Yeah, and that the mind clicks from one frame to the next frame, doesn't it? Right? Yeah. it's not like that. That's our conceptual understanding. That's not seeing what the mind really is. Because, if you start thinking about, well, there's these discrete moments of mind, okay? So when actually does one discrete moment of mind end and another one begin? It feels, there's these discrete moments of mind. So like the picture frames in a 7mm thing, you can tell where one stops and the other starts when you're looking at them standing still. Okay? So we get this idea, well, we should be able to do that with our mind. Oh, there's the line where one starts and the other one stops. Really?
So what's the
Okay.
basis of designation. The basis of designation.
Yeah, I mean, we're just dealing here with how ambiguous terms are. We think we know what something is, but when we look for what it is exactly from its own side, what is a moment of mind, so I can draw a line around it.
But what's the meaning of them saying that we perceive it in that?
Well, we perceive it. When you look for the telephone, you can't find a real telephone, but you can still perceive it.
But when you're actually, if one's engaged in samadhi, that's a direct perception of the impermanence of the mind.
Yeah.
They're perceiving a moment there.
They're perceiving the ever-changingness of the moments.
But you just said there isn't the moment.
Yeah, there are moments, but the moments are not fixed. Maybe this is something we need to experience. Yeah, because the analysis doesn't take us very, we get really blocked. Where's this moment of mind? I want to draw a line around this moment of mind,
If there are no boundaries around any moments of mind, like they're not discrete, then what's with the 64 or 68 or whatever it was, moments of mind?
Yeah, and a finger snap. It's making something, Just
That's just
you conventionally divide something. We say a day has 24 hours. What's an hour? Who made up an hour? Can you see an hour? Can you hold an hour? We were the ones that created hours. Yeah? From the side of a day, the day didn't, create 24 hours. Actually, I think if we should have been much smarter. I mean, why 24 hours? It's so difficult to multiply and divide things. Why not have everything on the basis of 10? Why not have 10 hours in a day? Really? Wouldn't that be easier? And why 60 minutes in an hour? Half an hour is 30 minutes. That doesn't make any sense when you do decimal things, It gets all screwy. Why don't we just have, 10 hours a day and maybe 100 minutes in each hour? Certainly it'd be much easier. Because we're the ones who make all this up. We're the ones who made it up. Aren't we? So we can make it up differently.
Do you think it has something to do with the rotation of the planet?
It must. I don't know.
Calendars are also messed up because it doesn't work.
Yeah. Right.
So many different calendars because it actually doesn't work.
Yeah.
They're catching up with leap years and
Yeah. We're going to have to end. But
just
quick
have a question about
Yeah.
this handout and the material, especially where you're getting the mindfulness of mind. I don't quite understand it. Is this handout like the...
That's the root text. What you got at the beginning is the root text. And so now we are on the second point of the root text.
And where, but
The objects of
you want
heart.
to read the text is for how you're filling this out. You haven't collected collected all this, or is it?
Oh, so how am I getting what I'm saying to you? From, they have commentaries on the text, and so I've studied these commentaries with my teachers. Oh, no, I mean, I only have oral transcripts of commentaries. Okay, we have to stop now.